I'm Keshajan Etimbal from Basis W1C, reporting to violence against women and girls, a pandemic we must end now. As we near the end of the year, the Philippines, as many other countries in the world, has been in quarantine for more than 9 months of a state of a global pandemic that has stolen life, mobility, precious time for education and economic security from millions of people. The end is not yet in sight. In a July 23, 2020 of it that I said that one of the most insidious consequences of the pandemic is the rise of gender-based violence, GBV. Children and adolescents, particularly girls, are confronted with violence and abuse as a result of prolonged lockdown. We recently marked an intensive 18 days campaign to end violence against women, a global call to action and powerful reminder that our work to end GBV is unfinished. For survivor of gender-based violence locked down in their home with a abuser, that COVID-19 pandemic is only one of the compounding risks and that threaten their physical and mental. Even before this global health crisis, violence against women, VAW was plaguing one out of every Filipinas who is married or has been married at least once in their life. We know the incidents and numbers escalate during disaster, but one can only estimate what impact this might have on the whole country. The United Nations Population Fund (UNFPA) statement that there has been a 20% increase in domestic violence globally. A study commissioned by UNFPA approximates that intimate partner violence will increase by 16% in the country. By the end of the year, there will be a statement 839,000 women who are married or who has been married at least once in their life who would experience GBV during this pandemic. It is our moral responsibility to elevate the plight and needs of GBV survivors even as we talk about the perils and risks of COVID-19. We have growing evidence, however, that we may be failing individuals most at risk of GBV during this pandemic. UNFPA's State of World Population Report revealed and across the globe from 2020 to 2030 there could be an additional 13 million girls and their 18 who would marry resulting from the disruption of program and service. An economic challenge brought by COVID-19 when parents from low-income families are unable to find jobs that deepening poverty brought by the pandemic can push families to consider marrying of their daughter in the hopes of a better life for their children. We also know that perpetrators and human traffickers are taking advantage of the economic hardships of families. In the Philippines, where 73 million Filipinos or some 67% of the population use social media. The internet is a platform for cybercriminals preying on women and young people. In particular, social media provide much room for abusers to engage in sexual exploitation to women and young people behind closed doors and in front of a webcam. Gender-based online sexual harassment continues to rise, especially targeting young women and girls. Widespread are rape jokes, rape trend, and other sexist remarks that negatively impact women and girls. It is important to note that base gender online sexual harassment is punishable by law under ERE 11313 or the Safe Space Act. We cannot sacrifice or endanger vulnerable survivors by rendering them invisible, minimizing or denying their place for help and assistance. The Commission on Human Rights has received report the request for rescue and assistance for GBV survivors were allegedly dismissing by local duty bearer. This despite an series of policy insurances requiring and mandating and the continuity of GBV service, medical management of rape, mental health and psychosocial service, legal service, safety, planning and case management, safety of security service and or residential filter. For this picture is example of violence against women and girls. That's all. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Jana Velus and I'm going to report victim blaming. So what is victim blaming?
Victim blaming is a violence acts are always choices that individuals make, yet it is the people who are harmed by violence acts that often receive negative responses from their loved ones, as well as from various social institutions. Why is it that some victims and survivors of violent crime get blamed for what has happened to them through no fault of their own? Crime victims are often scrutinized as to who they were with, what they were wearing, or what they might have done to cause the violence committed against them. The scrutiny should befall violence itself. We must speak out against those who choose to use violence as a means to an end. So what is victim blaming? Victim blaming is a defaulting act that occurs when the victims of a crime or an accident is held responsible in whole or in part for the crimes that have been committed against them. This blame can appear in the form of negative social responses from legal, medical, and mental health professionals, as well as from the media and immediate family members and other acquaintances. Some victims of crime receive more sympathy from society than others. Often, the responses towards crime victims are based on the misunderstanding of others. This misunderstanding may lead them to believe that the victim deserved what happened to them or that they are individuals with low self-esteem who seek out violence. As a result, it can be very difficult for victims to cope when they are blamed for what has happened to them. So what constitutes victim blaming? Example of victim blaming may include things like, you had to know what was going to happen if we went up to that person's apartment. Or, you should have been drinking. You must have sent mixed messages. Was your door even locked? What were you wearing? How hard did you try to stop it? Why didn't you come forward sooner? Of course, there are many ways people either outright blame victims or subtly imply they must have provoked the predator or not tried hard enough to make it stop. So, why it happens? Ano mahitabo man eh? Victim blaming occurs anytime someone says or implies that a sexual assault was the victim's fault. Sometimes, people do this to help themselves feel better. They feel, they feel safer if they can imagine that the victims did something wrong. Then, they convince themselves that they may be able to protect themselves so that they won't become a victim or that their loved ones are also less likely to be victimized. We see this involving other crimes too, not just sexual assault. For example, if your neighbor's house is burglarized, you might feel better if you learn that they had left the garage door unlocked or that they associated with some not so good people. It may help you continue believing that the world is safe and you aren't likely to become the victim of a random crime. So why victims blame themselves? Nganong blame man sa mga biktima ang ilang kaugalingon? So, victims sometimes blame themselves for the same reason others blame them. They want to believe the world is fair. Blaming themselves may also help them feel safer in some ways. Sometimes, it's easier to convince yourself, if I dress conservatively, this won't happen to me ever again, or if I don't drink so much, I would have been able to fend off my attacker. Such toxic self-blame, however, is unhealthy and it can take a serious toll on an individual's well-being. Sexual assault is never the victim's fault. It's always the perpetrator's fault. Always remember that. So, why victim blaming is dangerous? Victim blaming is dangerous because blaming the victim makes it more difficult for that person to come forward and report the assault. On a societal level, it means fewer crimes get reported and fewer predators get persecuted. Victim blaming also reinforces predator-like attitudes. It allows perpetrators to avoid being held accountable for their actions. Victim blaming can lead to increased and unnecessary suffering for the victims. They may experience ridicule while at the same time watching the predators avoid punishment instead of getting the justice they deserve. This may increase unhelpful emotions like shame and guilt as it delays their healing. It may also add to their toxic self-blame.